Good afternoon and welcome to this World Oregon webinar. It is Tuesday, September 13th. We are here today discussing The Architect, a novel by Nawzad Othman. And I'm glad that you could join us for this very, very auspicious event. Before we get started, I want to talk about a couple things we have coming up at World Oregon. The big thing is Diplomacy Begins Here, Bridging Citizen Engagement and Environmental Action. This is a summit that we are doing with Global Ties US and the US Department of State, which will be held October 13th at the World Forestry Center. It is an excellent opportunity to bring people from around the country, industry leaders, thought leaders, elected officials, policy professionals, looking at global engagement for positive change and exploring emergent best practices around global citizenship and the commons, the social and economic values of global exchange and citizen diplomacy, and how we navigate climate change and sustainability with an equitable lens on prosperity. This is also a return to public programming for World Oregon. It will be our first foray into the town square in almost 3 years. And we hope that you can join us. I'm going to put a link to find out more and register for the program, but hope that you can join us. It is an exciting opportunity. We hosted one of these summits back in 2017 at the U of O White Stag building, and it brought people from all over the country to see Oregon and see what we do well here in Oregon with all of your help. So today, we have Nawzad Othman with us. He is known to many of you in the World Oregon community for his long involvement as a trustee and a former board chair, and as a rich resource on programs dealing with Middle East issues. Interestingly, giving further credence to the idea that Oregonians do not retire, they just find new challenges and page-turning adventures, Nawzad joins us today for a different kind of program altogether. This is the release of his first novel, The Architect, which is steeped in high-tech intrigue and the intersections of AI, cybersecurity, espionage, and a plot that is based around a new building in the heart of Dubai. So just briefly, Nawzad was born in Erbil into a Kurdish family with deep connections to the history and evolution of the Kurdistan region. He immigrated to the US when he was 18, earning a degree in civil engineering and a master's of urban and regional studies, and gained considerable experience as a transportation engineer, bridge and airport design engineer in the Midwest and Oregon, including serving as public works and planning for the city of Lake Oswego before founding Otak in 1981, which grew to be one of Oregon's largest and most respected engineering firms. So I'm very excited that we have with us today Nawzad, who has taken his years working in Iraq and Abu Dhabi and the UAE to lay the groundwork for this latest project. And I'm glad that you could join us as we explore the stories and the experiences, both real and fictional, that inspired this latest chapter in his life. So Nawzad, welcome.
Good to be here. Good to see you, Tim.
Yeah, so I'm going to put a link, because we're going to be talking about the book throughout this. I'm going to put a link to be able to buy a copy for yourself and for all of your family. It makes a great Christmas present. So yeah, welcome, Nawzad. Many of our members know you for speaking on Kurdish issues, Iraqi issues, and just general Middle East issues over the years. And I would have put money on you if you were going to write a book on writing a memoir that brought together a lot of that experience. So I was tickled to find out, and very intrigued, that your second or third act was becoming a novelist. I'm curious, what inspired this bold and probably for a lot of us very scary step of writing a piece of fiction?
Well, Tim, it's an interesting story, what you bring up with the memoir. In fact, that's how it started. This was in December of 2020. We're in the middle of COVID. We can't go anywhere. We can't see anybody. And then, you just adjust. And I'm an avid reader. I read all kinds of books, from novels to history to management to politics, you name it. I don't know. I've always intrigued about, well, someday maybe you can write something. And I started the memoir, actually. And even I wrote about 10, 12 chapters. And I called it the dual track. I remember, and it starts out with, I land in Brookings, South Dakota. I have a scholarship to study civil engineering. I'm 17 years old, from Iraq. And then I said, hey, America, here I am. Are you ready for me? I'm not landing in New York or Los Angeles, but in Brookings, South Dakota. But to me, it was America. So, and the whole thing evolved as I wrote the book. I've always been intrigued. This has been 65 years since I've been in the US, about American culture, history, politics. I remember I've watched every single national elections, from the very first one in 1960 with Kennedy and Nixon, and going all the way. And I was so intrigued by all the civil rights movement of the 60s and the Vietnam War. And then we had the Watergate issue with Nixon in the 70s. And I used to tell my friends all over, I said, this is one of the great moments in American history. So, great moments, look, it's a great moment. We had the American system deposed of a president without a shot being fired. Where else are you going to find that? So the system was at its best. It worked. You go over the years, the economic and the growth and the technology and how that has affected everybody's life. So the essence of the memoir was really, I called it the dual track. The dual track, I wasn't sure exactly what to call it, the dual track of discovery. Discovery from a 17-year-old kid in South Dakota, as first time lands in America, and to learn about myself. I mean, there's growth. You go to college and you discover who you are. That was the discovery. And over the years, it became a lifelong discovery. And the second track was discovery about this country, about America, its culture, its history. I've worked in so many different places. When I graduated in college, I lived in Sturgis, South Dakota, built on projects and highways. I had friends who were ranchers and cowboys. And I've worked in Minneapolis and Chicago. So you get that urban feel and you get that rural feel. You have the sense of the what we call the liberals, the progressives, and the conservatives. But it's always part of the dynamics, all part of what this country was all about. So that was the memoir. I started it and I started reading, and somewhere about, 10, 11 chapters, I said, this can really become very personal as you grow, as you can imagine. If you want to share, you really need to be authentic. You really need to share. So I said, well, I'm going to. In the meantime, the idea of writing a novel was very intriguing to me. So I said, well, let me just start. Frankly, I really did not know what I was going to write, but I knew there were some pieces of the puzzle can come together. One, Dubai always, it's the iconic city with crazy stuff, crazy buildings happen. And we had an office there in Dubai, Abu Dhabi for 5, 6 years. So I knew the culture, I knew the buildings. And I was also, my background, and I'm an engineer and a planner, and we have a lot of architects, and we did a lot of projects and buildings. So very much intrigued and enamored about constructability and building and the impact that buildings do have of the way we work, the way we live. So I said, okay. And in fact, some of my friends, why did you call this the architect? Why not? You're an engineer. I said, well, the engineers are upset because I call it architect. No, I'm kidding. And they weren't upset. Then the architects were saying, Nawzad, we knew you always wanted to be an architect. I'm a retired architect professor that lives in Auburn. So anyway, so I started putting this together. So I said, okay, what could be the hook, the piece? So I said, wow, intrigue, international, spy, cyber technology, artificial intelligence. Because today, when you look at the AI part, the way it affects so many pieces on the miniature level throughout our lives. So I said, I was very intrigued. And I know that the new trends in a lot of architectural school is the buildings, they can do so many different things with it because you can do it. So I called a friend of mine, a dear friend, in Intel. I said, give me an idea about artificial intelligence so I can do some research or I can put the pieces together. And he said, well, in very simple terms, AI is access to unbelievable data and ability with unlimited computing power. You put those two together and you can do so many things with it. You can have variables that you can address and that may have taken us months. You can do it in minutes. So that's the pieces tying it together. Became the building, became some bad people who wanted to put some hardware in the building that was not what it appears to be. It had some defense department, offensive weaponry component, and on and on. So, and I just started writing. I didn't know how to write. I didn't know how to plot, but I really got into it. And I had the first draft, believe it or not, Tim, the first draft, I just kept, it was close to, what was it, 300 pages in about 4 months. And I didn't know that that was really fast. Oh, wow, my God, I do it. I'll send it to a publisher and get it published. Oh, no. Oh, no. Well, after. So that's how I started. And
well, it's funny because, you brought up what was actually my first question is, you had this amazing career as an engineer, yet you did call the book The Architect, and have a copy of it right here. And I think I teased you about this. Is it because, when we look at this, we see the architect, it's like James Bond here. Is the architect sexier than the engineer?
I hope my engineering friends don't get mad at me. In a way, yes, it is, because I was either going to talk about this huge bridge that could be a problem, or this building, all this stuff. And, I think the building appeared to be a bit more intriguing, even though the engineer has a great influence. How the engineer and the architect are partners. They work together. Especially when these large, complex buildings, they really have to work together. But that's what it was.
Well, and at least you didn't call it, you're building the fountainhead. It was Al Bustan. But so for many of us who only see or read about that region, Dubai and Abu Dhabi seem like these surreal, magic wonderlands of glass towers and these, extreme symbols of wealth and power rising from the Gulf. Sort of a kind of a crossroads of intrigue waiting to happen. What do we get or not get about the region and the sort of complicated finance and political nature of these types of projects? Because you've worked on big projects. And how did you try and weave that into the book?
Well, when you look at the region, and it used to have very high visibility, and it still does in the Arab Spring and what has been going on, and it still does. It's hard to define. The region is not monolithic. It has different pieces of the puzzle. It has different dynamics. And now we have as many failed or potentially failing states still in the Middle East. And we have refugees and IDPs still in the 20, 30 million, especially in Iraq and Syria, and then you add Yemen and Libya, and they're still struggling. And Iraq, even after all these years, they're still struggling. They cannot even form the government properly. So all those issues are real. Now you get the UAE, and then you have some of the oil-producing countries. Some have really mismanaged how they use and fund their work, their project. What's interesting about UAE is that I forgot to turning the phone off, sorry. It was interesting about the UAE, they really managed over the last 50 years, since they were independent in the 70s, they really were villages, to create amazing cities. Now, some, like in Dubai had become iconic. And in fact, their whole model in Dubai was, we don't quite understand, build it, they'll buy it. Build it and they buy it, kind of thing. And a lot of the architecture, some people call it architecture. And when you see, or some people say, wow, this is really amazing what they have done. It's transformed from the beginning, how they developed. I mean, the initial building, to say 20 stories, they got recycled to 40 stories. Then they're recycled to the iconic buildings, what it is. And the last several years, they managed to hire the best talents literally in the world. And many well-known American architects where they're building the towers that really are fascinating. And Zaha Hadid does some work. The Brits have done a lot of wonderful work. And they experimented with the buildings. So the architect and the engineer were given a bit of a free rein to do kinds of things, but also constrained. There was a period where they were trying to impose an Islamic architecture component that was, for some, very difficult to work. But now it's wide open, and now they're very committed in having the buildings to be green buildings, sustainable buildings. So they're investing heavily in sustainability. So UAE stands out differently from most of them. It doesn't mean they don't have all problems. Of course they do. Recession, labor issues that come in from Southeast Asia and so forth, so on. But as a rebuilding their cities, they have probably done a phenomenal job. And especially their last few years, their focus on green buildings and sustainability. And they have done that. It's different from some others. Some of the other countries rich in oil become failed states, Iraq, Iran, Algeria is not doing all that great, and then Libya, you name it. It's like we call it the oil curse. And then what's intriguing about Dubai is it has become an incredible tourist attraction coming from especially Europeans. They go for weekend 5-star hotels and restaurants, a huge, huge tourist city. It's almost a city-state of its own. So, and they can build, and they really do spend the money on construction and on buildings, much more so than any of the other cities. So that was really the intrigue, and I've seen it, and I've seen how it works, the fast pace and the building and the talent that exists that coming, whether it's Brits or Americans or Dutch or Australians, everybody has had an influence in some of these projects.
So as I read the book and its cast of characters, so we meet Andy Sykes, the architect, Mary Tobias, who is a 25-year CIA veteran, Marwan, who's the chairman of Pinnacle Industries, General Khoury, the director of internal security. I couldn't help but wonder, was one of your protagonists you? I mean, did your own firsthand experience on projects inform any of the point of view or the humanity of the characters or multiple characters?
Well, I think when I finally realized when you write, you always write from your own personal experiences, right, Tim? I mean, you don't just pull some character out of the blue that doesn't ever exist, whether it's somebody you know or somebody you've seen or somebody you have read about. They all become part of it. And I'm sure some of these personalities have come through. I don't think any of them was me, except maybe in some of the areas of what the things you have done, the things you have seen. Some of them may be based on personal experience, but the personalities are people that I have seen and met that may fit that, may not be the exact same thing that they do. So all of them, whether it's that the local architect they work with, Ayman, or the chairman of the board, or the only people I really have to make everybody up is the CIA and the Defense Department and the CIA agents, and then some other terrorist groups. That was all out of my head. Yeah.
So, the other character that really looms and really looms in the book is this zero carbon building, Al Bustan.
Yeah.
Was it based on an actual project you've worked on or something that is happening, or is it purely speculative?
Actually, it's a combination of both. It was a lot of the Al Bustan is really many of the projects that you see or the big buildings, facilities, all are required to be green, sustainable. So there's tremendous amount of emphasis on how it's done, and the technology being used in terms of adjusting the skin and the buildings to climate and how it. And the new wave and what's the best way to use it and calculate the capability so it becomes sustainable completely. That is happening. I just took it to a different direction from it. That being a part is the issue of security, and especially hacking, cybersecurity. How do people protect those buildings, especially the iconic ones and visible ones? Beyond just the human factor. So that's why the technology became very intriguing, because you use technology to design the building, construct the building. So, okay, well, let's take it one step further. How about the security? And that's where it came about.
Well, okay, so in the Othman ultimatum, in the international intrigue and espionage genre, and I'm thinking of people like Ludlum and Tom Clancy, it is rife with layers of a lot of very, very high-tech references, and people that read it often love to go through and look for the continuity arguments. And how did you go about fact-checking aspects of AI and cybersecurity, and what challenges did this pose?
That's an excellent question, Tim, because I figured immediately once I got myself into it, you can literally, wow, I need to be accurate. The research was constant with me, constantly. Give you an example is the AI, artificial intelligence. How has that been working? Or the really huge, tall, most iconic buildings in the world. Research the architects and how they did it, and their use of technology and ability to make that. So that was really intriguing. And then in the cybersecurity side, I had to learn how does that work? How does, because I found out there's tremendous amount of research going on in the US Defense Department and others about creating anti-hacking hardware, not just software. And that was, and that I read books, I read some articles, I read some research papers. I realized when you do anything like this, when you write on any subject, you have to, the research become a very critical part of it. And I had to do it. I didn't realize it when I first started. And the minute I got into it, I knew that that has to happen.
So I'm thinking about, we were talking about inspiration. You were saying you read a lot of international thrillers, and I'm thinking of other folks who have spoken for us in the past, like Peter Singer. Peter
Right.
Singer and August Cole wrote Ghost Fleet, which was a work of fiction, but what informed it was all the work they'd done on technical aspects of sort of frontiers of war. Um, I'm curious, who you read for inspiration and kind of how you prepped for this. I mean, you said you just jumped in and decided to write a novel.
Well, actually, Peter Singer was one of the books that I read too, and I was doing research because he had written some books about offensive weaponry and technology and so forth. I mean, the books from the local side, whether it's normally when you see these kinds of books, you see the protagonists are either lawyers or policemen, detectives, especially on the local genre, or the sheriff. And you go in the espionage side, they're usually CIA agents or FBI agents or MI6 kind of. So I've always I've read books like Michael Connelly and Baldacci and Grisham. They're all their stuff is local, and then you have the Lee Child with Reacher, this fast-paced English writer, and Forsyth and John le Carré, and then especially on the international, they're Brits, and the way they've written about MI6 and the spies. Graham Greene, that's old style from way back, and the way he wrote, a lot of it was the writer, and plus the style. I was very much drawn to short sentences, short paragraphs, and short dialogues. I found when I read books, I prefer that kind of way of reading instead of having 2-3 paragraphs long describing something. I'd rather just get right to it.
Well, the writing is very, very solid, and I'm not just saying that. And I would actually encourage people, of course, to read the book. You are very, very good at sort of establishing the scene of the crime and setting the stage. And we know what Marwan looks like. We understand Mary Tobias because of the context that you build around this 25-year CIA veteran. We can see Andy Sykes on this Emirates business class airline, which I love that there's basically a bar in there and a lounge area. We can't even imagine because we get shoved into flights like sardines. But yeah, I think you did a great job at framing and shaping the characters. And
thank you. Really good to hear. Yeah.
But we were talking about this before we started the program, about the oil curse and politics and not wanting to get too mired in politics. But did you find it hard to write about the region without delving into it or having an agenda with how you talked about it?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can't, when you write, when I wrote, you can separate some of the politics. But I didn't want this to be a political thing because it diverts from a novel. It's now, but you can't help make statements or say things that has any point of view, regardless, get one point of view versus the other. But then, and again, that would have taken away the attention from what I was hoping to achieve as a fast-paced, quick relating to what was happening. When I started out, I had some long chapters and paragraphs about exactly what you're saying. And the publisher said, and then I learned from the reading Stephen King's book, said the very first thing you do after you say first draft is get rid of 20% of your writing, because writing has to be dealt with brevity, to the point, and don't encumber it with peripheral stuff. That comes somewhere else. So that was it. It was important not to get into the political side, right or wrong or whatever, even though we have antagonists all over the place.
Well, so fiction aside, let's talk about the concrete, no pun intended, realities of wealth and power and influence that exist in that region, and where you see U.S. relations going with regard to UAE and MBS and Saudi and some of the and even the ever tenuous dance with Iran, and yeah, and then I'll follow up with something else.
Well, I mean, you're talking about some of the most complex issues that's been with us for years and years. I think the one thing that has come fairly clear, and especially with the latest that's been going on, is that the United States has always had that that dance, if you want to call it a dance, if you call it the tension between values and ideology that we believe in versus reality and pragmatism. I mean, we've dealt with the Soviet Union, we've dealt with dictators, we've dealt with, and we still look at the world stage, so with the people we have to deal with. And these are and how do we manage to do that? How do we manage to make sure everybody understands where we are in terms of our humanity, our values, our ideology, and then recognizing that certain things takes time, and you can't just abruptly change it. A good example of that, I was one of the first that was completely supportive of the Arab Spring in 2011. And my God, look what happened. Every single one of those countries, Syria, Yemen, Libya, are failed states. Egypt and Tunisia back to where they were to beginning. So what does that tell you is you cannot impose the whole notion of democracy abruptly without people wondering what, if they're not used to it, how does that work? What do we do? How do you change it? So is a constitutional monarchy the way to go? Is a benevolent dictator the way to go? And many people say these kinds of things because democracy is difficult and so forth. And when you read the latest things that's been being said, in fact, some people say the emphasis is not so much for the time being of democracy and the right to vote, because a lot of these countries, people vote, but nothing comes of it. It's the focus about the key components of society, the human rights issue, rule of law, free press, personal security. Now, a form of government that we have, or we used to, even today, our own form of government is challenged because democracy is messy, it's difficult, and you have to fight for it all the time. Now, you can imagine then putting that kind of concept in areas that have never seen it, very difficult. So what I perceive, some new model of governance is beginning to people talk about. And it isn't about the democracy versus a dictatorship. It's about the whole 3-4 pieces: economic security, personal security, free press, rule of law, human rights. I mean, so that's still the struggle. That's still what's going on.
Well, and I mean, as we know, it is happening in our own backyard. And Freedom House, I think for the 16th year in a row, has illustrated that democratic countries are backsliding. But I'm curious, something like this, this aspect of free expression is central to democracy. And are you seeing the possibility for an Arabic language version of this?
I hope so. I do. I hope so. If people like it, that will happen. They read it. That happens. So we'll see.
So, who's in the movie version of your book?
it has to be Tim something. It has to be.
How about this? How about we give our audience a little taste of the book? And maybe the best way to do that is, how about just reading the prologue?
Oh, the prologue. Okay.
Because it will leave. It's like eating one potato chip. You're going
You were a good
to want to
reader.
have more.
You're a good reader. You want me to read it, or do you want to do it?
Oh no! I want you to do it. In fact,
Okay.
you should record an audio version so everyone can get it through their Libby account.
Okay, the prologue is a one pager, which is here we go. The medical examiner stripped off his gloves, having completed the autopsy of a large Caucasian man found half buried in the desert 2 kilometers outside of Dubai. The victim had been shot in the back of the head, his hands and feet tied with rope. Any ideas? Asked the attending police officer, peering into the hole in the man's skull. Nothing until we get the DNA test results. And that's only if there is a match at our database, said the examiner, over his shoulders as he was washing his hands. Any clues on his clothing? Any jewelry? The policeman asked. Nothing except for this we found sewn into the jacket lining. And the examiner then handed a 2-inch square photo, sealed in an evidence bag, to the officer. The officer looked. Hey, this is the new El Bustan Tower, right? The officer asked. The examiner grabbed the photo and stared at it. You're right. I thought it was familiar, but couldn't place it. Why is this photo hidden on this man? I don't know, said the officer. Maybe he likes the building. The examiner shook his head. These days, people take photos on their phones. You better show this to the captain, he said, and handed over the photo.
So that's what we have. We have radical non-state actors. We have AI and cybersecurity. We have architects and CIA agents, and we have dark secrets, and it's all in The Architect. And I'm hoping that folks get themselves a copy, because I actually really, really enjoyed it. And then, Nawzad, you stopped by the office the other day, and you mentioned that you're already on your second novel.
Mm-hmm.
And is that what happens? You get the bug and you just keep going. You mentioned a little bit about what it's about, and it felt like you were diving a lot more into the complexities you mentioned earlier about the region and some of the issues. Talk a little bit about what you're working on.
Well, the premise of the second book is about it's about really 3 women, but they're led by the one woman and her daughter and her young son, who were forced to marry an ISIS commander in the city of Raqqa, Syria. And then when the bombs fall, trying to liberate the city and the fighting in the streets, the person she was married to is killed, or she thought he had been killed in the bombing. So she grabs her children and she escapes and winds up, ultimately, the long story short, in a refugee camp in northern, she was of Kurdish and Arabic families in Kurdistan. And then the life of the refugee and what they have to do. But there's also some intrigue in all of this. Is her commander husband was in charge of laundering the wealth of the ISIS terrorists into some of the banks. And as he was killed, or thought he was killed, some of those bank accounts went missing. And what happens to him, and the role of the wife and the children, and then their journey, and and then people going back after them, and the anthropologist professor, a woman educated University of Chicago, is there to help them. So you deal with international laundering of money, you deal with refugee camps, we deal with terrorist ISIS. So I don't know where it goes from there.
Well, what a tangled web we weave when we move on to our second novel. If we don't have questions from our online audience, I'm going to thank you for joining us. And again, you can get it on the Amazon. It is The Architect by Nawzad Othman. It is a page turner. It is a ripping yarn. It is worth the read. And you really knocked it out of the park on your first go. And I think that's, you should feel really, really good about that.
Thank you very much.
Of course. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Right.
I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Again, worldoregon.org, you can find information on upcoming visitor opportunities, on public programming, on our global classroom. We will be returning to the town square with public programs in October. We look forward to seeing all of your faces in person. And we will be posting this to YouTube if you want to share it with anyone who missed it. And as always, stay safe, be well, and thank you for helping us connect to the world. Have a great day.
Thank you, Tim.